we'll put them under a microscope. And then we'll say something like, oh, we see a mix of these different types or strains or species of cyanobacteria that are potentially toxin producers. And this is the information we can give. I'll set myself up for later. One of the questions you'll get later is, just by looking at this sample, can I tell whether or not toxins were produced at that time or were in the water? So that will be a question we'll come back to in my talk. I am from the Natural Resources Research Institute, which is part of the University of Minnesota system, but really we think about delivering these integrated research solutions to natural resources management problems in the state. We have people working on mining, metallurgy, biorenewables, aquatic invasive species, sulfate issues in our water. But cyanobacteria is one of these things that really fits in with the sustainability. So first off, I just want to start talking about, well, what are cyanobacteria blooms and why should we care about these? Like, why are we here today talking about cyanobacteria? Kind of one of the first questions I always get, well, I'll save that for a second. Cyanobacteria are actually bacteria. They're also known as blue-green algae, is kind of like the common name that people use. But these are actually very far from algae. Like green algae and diatoms are more similar to terrestrial land plants. And cyanobacteria are more closely related to bacteria, which seems really weird because they're all in the same lake as photoautotrophs and photosynthesizing and forming the base of our food web. So we kind of think about them as being very similar, but one's prokaryotic, one's eukaryotic. All that means is they are very far apart from each other in their physiology. These can be single-celled organisms, they can be colonial, they can be filamentous. You can see in that image over there on the right from NOAA, these are all kinds of colonial and filamentous cyanobacteria, but they take on a lot of different shapes and forms. And from those forms, we can identify who they are. This is the question I was going to get to. Like, the one question I get is, well, are these a new thing? Because people are talking more and more about cyanobacteria or blue-green algae blooms because they tend to be an emerging issue that we have in our aquatic resources. But they actually evolved a long time ago, 3.2 billion years ago. They've been here on the Earth. So lots of the adaptations they developed, we think about them in the context of what they could be doing today, but they may have developed those mechanisms a long time ago under a totally different set of circumstances. So I think we always have to think about that long evolutionary history when we're thinking about cyanobacteria. And cyanobacteria are a natural part of lakes. We tend to talk about them when it's a bad thing, but these things are natural members of our lake community. Without cyanobacteria, we wouldn't have oxygen in our atmosphere and none of us would be here right now. So they were responsible. They were the first photosynthetic organisms on Earth. And they also formed the base of the food web along with diatoms and green algae and other types of algae that we tend to think about. So they help support the fish that we eat as well.
They're not advancing online, so hang on a second.
Oh. I'm sorry.
I don't know how to fix that one. I'm going to stop sharing and see what we can do here.
So were they still just seeing the title slide? Oh no.
What slide are you on online here? Can somebody type it in the chat? Can you see them now? Oops. All right, try sharing again. Are they advancing now online? No slides. How about now, Rory? Yeah, that's just, we see the PowerPoint program still on the first slide. Okay, so we might have to do back on cover.
Oh, can you switch the screens that it's sharing to?
Yeah, so how do we do this one?
There's normally like a button that says
One, shoot on.
Okay.
No, not my part, but.
Huh.
It's the-
This is a good team player, you'd run over and support.
Oh, yeah, there.
Settings right
Elena, can someone sit at the computer with the slides and advance it manually on the computer that way?
Yeah, okay, how's that? Folks online?
Oh, but now folks here are gonna see this.
Oh, well. It doesn't, if you're okay with it.
Yeah. Is everyone cool with that? Sorry about that.
You need to see it, then.
Yeah, you'll be one slide ahead of me, so.
Slide, we see the JC Lloyd slide. That,
Yeah,
that one?
yeah, that one. So they're seeing the correct slide. Okay. I don't know if I can advance though
There will be your advancer.
now. Advance, next slide, please. All right. All right. So hopefully someone are seeing a glass that looks like a green machine drink or something like that, a health drink. Well, yeah, so the reason we tend to think about cyanobacteria is because when we have these nuisance algal blooms that form challenges that then we have to manage. So one of the big things we think about from a public health aspect is cyanobacteria have the potential to produce toxins. Kind of the big example of this and the big poster child we think about with harmful algal blooms is Lake Erie. And it was back in 2014, I believe. Yeah, because it's been over 10 years now. Back in 2014, some of the water from Lake Erie that services Toledo and surrounding areas, they actually got toxins in the public water supply. And it shut down water for 400,000 people for about a week, where they had to then find alternate drinking sources, and there were water rationing lines and a whole host of things that we tend not to think about, at least here in the US. So that's one of the challenges. But even besides just that public health threat, cyanobacteria can wreak havoc on aquatic habitats as well. So when cyanobacteria bloom, basically all that means is that they're forming a lot of biomass really quickly. So there's not something there, and then you go back the next day and you see this huge bloom, which forms a lot of organic matter that then when it starts to decay and decompose, it uses up all the oxygen and water. And so we have issue with depressed oxygen levels, which can lead to things like fish kills across a whole lake. And I always tell people, when the public starts seeing fish kills, that's when they know there's a problem. And that's where like DNR and Soil and Water Conservation Districts start getting a lot of phone calls like, what's going on in this lake? All the fish are dying. Next slide, please. All right. But really, it's a handful of cyanobacteria that can actually produce these toxins. And really, they only produce them under certain circumstances, which makes it really challenging to predict when those cyanotoxins are going to be in the water. So MPCA's motto is when in doubt, stay out. You've probably heard this before. So if the water looks like pea soup, like Campbell's pea soup, or there's a huge surface scum on the surface, that's when you want to stay away from it. Keep the kids out of it, keep the pets out of it, because those are the highest risk for having issues. In the state of Minnesota, we get several reported dog deaths every year due to cyanobacteria blooms. And those are probably drastically underreported. There's probably a lot more than that never get reported or never get confirmed. Next slide, please. And one of the interesting things is we've been studying cyanobacteria toxins for 50 years now, and we still don't know exactly why cyanobacteria produce them. The reason why I bring this up is because if we don't know why they produce them, it's hard to figure out how to prevent them from producing them, right? Or at least being able to forecast when they're likely to be present to keep people safe. So there's a whole host of thoughts there. You know, it gives them a competitive advantage because it hurts other algae. It makes it so they can't get eaten by zooplankton and other microscopic crustaceans, to a whole host of other things, but still we just don't really have a good handle on what that is right now. Next slide. And the other reason why we should care is that we're seeing cyanobacteria now, but in the future, they're anticipated to become more frequent, more severe, and longer lasting. I would say the other thing we're going to see is we're going to start seeing them in places where we haven't seen them in the past. So for some places, this is like kind of a legacy issue they've been dealing with for a while. Lake Erie is one of those examples. Some examples like Lake Superior, this is a whole new challenge that we never thought we were going to have to deal with. There are a couple reasons why we think they're going to be more potent in the future. And lots of that is based on their physiology, kind of, you know, what are their growth adaptations and stuff like that? And how will that align with what we're going to see under climate change? So nutrients are a big driver of these things. Phosphorus and nitrogen, the more nutrients you have in a system, the more you have for higher growth potential. And also nutrient pulses. So if we see these big, like extreme weather events just dumping in like a whole lot of water, a whole lot of sediment, a whole lot of nutrients, that can really kind of fuel these cyanobacteria blooms because they can rapidly grow when all those nutrients come into the lake. The other reason why we expect them to be more prevalent in the future is cyanobacteria do like warmer conditions. So, or another way to say this is other algae don't do well under warmer conditions. So as we see global warming, we're likely to see things shift towards preferences towards cyanobacteria. And also the warmer the water column gets, the more stable it gets, and the top stratifies from the bottom more strongly. And one of the cool traits that the cyanobacteria have is they're buoyant and can float to the surface. So on calm days, they can float to the surface and shade everything out underneath, kind of like the canopy of a forest can shade out the understory, right? Similar thing here. Next slide, please.
I don't know how you want to
Yeah.
handle the questions. So one thing we've noticed on Double Track is that it tends to, I don't know if it's just because the wave action, you know, accumulate along the shoreline.
Yep.
Does that mean that it could be also toxic in the middle of the lake, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll get to it later.
Sure.
And if I don't answer it, then just come back and, but yeah.
Another thing related to the toxicity. So does, the cyanobacteria, it produces toxin as it decomposes only, or is that when it just takes up more oxygen from the lake?
Yeah, that's when you tend to see more oxygen being taken up, and it's actually by the bacteria that are chewing on the cyanobacteria, they are respiring. And that's when you see the oxygen disappearing. But cyanobacteria can produce toxins at any time.
Okay, that's what
Yeah. So nutrient enrichment, what does that look like? So here's an image of one lake at one point in time under a low nutrient condition. This is not how you actually use a Secchi disc, but just for a visual, we always used to do this when I was in Iowa. We would take a picture of the Secchi disc at 8 inches depth. And that was our record for like how turbid or green the lake was. Just so if we ever got questioned on our data, we could come back to that image and say, no, this was a very turbid green system. So this is one example of that, 8 inches depth. If you go twice, click twice, you can see as the nutrients get more and more enriched in the system and you have more algal growth, you see that Secchi disc at the same depth just disappear under those highest conditions. And the other reason why I show this is because under low nutrient systems, you tend to have things like diatoms and green algae and things we think about as being the good phytoplankton in the system. And then when you move towards these nutrient-enriched system, it's almost a monoculture of cyanobacteria. It's like 90% cyanobacteria, which has, you know, implications for toxin levels and also the health of the habitat. Next slide, please. And so I think the other thing that's important to think about is, you know, cyanobacteria are responding both to kind of land use within the watershed and within the airshed of the lake, but they're also responding to climate as well. So here's just a little figure showing that, you know, you can get nutrient sources from multiple places. It could be residential, agricultural, industrial coming off the watershed. But we also have nutrients coming in through atmospheric deposition and precipitation. I know in the state of Iowa, when I worked down there, our rainfall had a very high phosphorus content to it, almost to the point where it would rain on a lake and you would see significant, you know, phosphorus increases in that system. This is also showing just as things get stronger and more strongly stratified that you can have those cyanobacteria that float to the surface. And the other point I want to make is it's not just temperature, but also precipitation. So cyanobacteria do really well when you get a lot of nutrients dumped in the system all at once, such as under an extreme rainfall event. And if that's followed by a drought, a really hot condition, very still, no movement to the water, that's when these things really bloom because you have all the nutrients in the system and now they can just thrive. I tend to think of it like when I'm making a pot of chili at home, right? You throw everything into the pot, you turn it on, you heat it up, and you start to let it cook. And that's really what cyanobacteria do in a lot of these lakes. Next slide. All right, so one of the things that's really challenging us right now, and I think this is why it's exciting to be studying cyanobacteria at the moment, is that we're starting to see them where we shouldn't see them, right? Like the textbook of limnology that I grew up studying says, if there's one place you're not going to find cyanobacteria in the world, it's Lake Superior. And now we're seeing them in Lake Superior. We're seeing them in our remote forested lakes as well. So Boundary Waters Canoe Area lakes, you know, that's a place where these are low nutrient cold water systems. They're the places where you shouldn't see cyanobacteria, but because of climate change, we're starting to see them more and more frequently. So I think this is causing us to rethink 50 years of research on cyanobacteria and really what's driving these things in new settings. Next slide. All right, so how can you identify cyanobacteria? One way that you can help your neighbors out in your communities is trying to avoid, you know, going into settings where we have harmful algal blooms and warning other people not to go in those same systems. Next slide. So what does a bloom look like? I originally had picture your favorite lake, and then I jumped to this slide and I was like, well, did your favorite lake look like this? Hopefully not. If it did, you probably need to get out and explore a little more. But these are the signs that you have a cyanobacteria bloom occurring. So the water looks a little bit like pea soup. There's visible surface scums that some people think look like spilled paint on the surface of a lake. It can be green, it can be turquoise, it can be blue. There's a whole host of colors that really these things can take on. Or you tend to see these floating globs or mats in lakes as well. Next slide. All right, but beware of the imposters, right? Every year when the trees are blooming and we have a lot of pollen outside, I always get calls about cyanobacteria blooms. And normally one of my first thoughts is, have you noticed any pollen on your car lately? And they're like, oh yeah, there's tons of pollen. I hate pollen. It's like, yeah, that's probably what's in the water as well. So that middle image is just showing pollen on a lake, which takes on a yellowish tint to it, but can look like cyanobacteria if you're not expecting that. The other thing we get a lot is green algae, filamentous green algae that form these long hair-like things. That's the image on the left there. And also duckweed or pondweed. I think most people are familiar with duckweed or pondweed. Little plants that float on the surface of the lake, but those can also be confused as cyanobacteria. And I do want to give a shout out to the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. We just gave a training like 2 weeks ago on harmful algal blooms, and they had some really nice slides that I stole directly from them in our workshop. So just want to give them a shout out. Next slide. So some ways you can test these, and there's a nice pamphlet right there, or if you're not here, that little QR tag will take you to that same pamphlet. You can use a jar test or a stick test. Basically, like the jar test says, you take some water, put it in a jar, cap it up. It could be an old ball jar, a water bottle, an old Pepsi bottle, you know, whatever you got. Just put it up there, close it up tight, and put it on your shelf for a little bit. Remember earlier I said cyanobacteria are really buoyant and can float to the surface. So if you put them in a jar and you see something like that image on the left, the right-hand side of the left image, it floats to the surface, that's cyanobacteria. If it sinks at the bottom because there's no agitation or something like that, probably not cyanobacteria. The other thing you can do is a stick test. You know, as a trained biologist, I say, you know, biology is the study of poking things with a stick and seeing how they respond. That's kind of what we're trained to do. So you can go out to a lake, you can take a stick, you can pick it up. If it's this filamentous thread-like structure, that is likely not cyanobacteria. That's likely a type of filamentous green algae. If you put your stick in the water and pull it up and everything all disperses around it, could be cyanobacteria. Next slide. The next 3 slides, I'm going to go through a little bit quickly, but these are some of the common toxin producers that we have in the region. The reason I put these up there is because if you have like a microscope, like a USB microscope at home, and you put these under a slide or something like that, these are what you can see. The first one is Delicospermum, which was formerly named Anabana, but now we call it Delicospermum. For short, you can just call it Dolly, so you don't have to worry about pronouncing it. But these tend to be these long, unbranched chains of cells that look like a pearl necklace for the most part. And they can be coiled or loosely spiraled or straight. But this is what Delicospermum tends to look like. Delicospermum is what we have in Lake Superior. That is the primary bloom former out there. Next slide. A Phanazomenon or Fanny, this is one of my favorite ones because you can actually ID a Phanazomenon in the field. If you're on a lake and you see what looks like a bunch of grass clippings floating in the water, that's likely a Phanazomenon, unless your neighbor's dumping their grass clippings straight into the lake, which hopefully they aren't. But these tend to form these little rafts of cells, these colonies, and they're really easy to see. So a Phanazomenon is what we call Fanny. Yeah, just these unbranched chains. And I'll skip over that part. Next slide.
These are all cyanobacteria.
Yeah, these are all cyanobacteria, and these are all potentially toxin-producing cyanobacteria. The next one is Mike or Microcystis, and basically these look like an amorphous clump of goo for the most part. Sometimes they're hard to identify. Sometimes people mis-ID them with like just detritus and junk like that in the water. But these are also another form that produces a host of toxins. Next slide. All right, I put this in because AI, right? Artificial intelligence. So people are starting to develop programs to try to help individuals ID cyanobacteria. This is one program called Bloom Optics. The reason I'm putting this up there is because we were donated a unit from the Great Lakes Observing System through NOAA. We have one of these. If anyone sends me a sample, the first thing I'll do is probably put it on Bloom Optics to see what's there and see if AI can ID it. I had a graduate student, Peter Birschbach, who did a whole study trying to identify when this Bloom Optics program did well and when it didn't. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. I'll just say that. So they're still working on this, but this is an easy way just to quickly look at a water sample and see whether or not there are potentially toxic cyanobacteria present. Next slide. So to come back to my earlier point, so can you see if a bloom is toxic? The answer is no. You can't see toxins in the water. And this is one of the challenging things that we get when we're trying to warn the public about staying away from cyanobacteria blooms, right? This is why MPCA says when in doubt, stay out, because we can't tell if something's toxic at the time, so it's best just to avoid it altogether. So the picture on the left is a cyanobacteria bloom on Lake Pelcher near the Twin Cities. I will say this bloom was toxic, very toxic at times. So from there, you could see whether or not there were toxins there, right? Whether or not they were above the threshold, you really couldn't tell, but this one tended to see blooms or toxins year after year. The next is just an image of the Delicospermum from Lake Superior. And I think the first thing was once we identified that this was in Lake Superior and was a potentially toxin producer, the first question is like, well, was it producing toxins at the time? Oh, can we go back one?
Yep. All right.
So the question was, well, was it producing toxins at the time? And a colleague of mine from the Large Lakes Observatory looked at the genes of that type of cyanobacteria. And lucky for us, it did not have the genes to produce the big toxins that we tend to think about, microcystin, anatoxin A, or saxitoxin. It just didn't have those genes. So it's not that it just wasn't producing them at the time. It's that luckily it can't produce those toxins. But again, you could look at another strain of Delicospermum that looks exactly like that, and it could have the toxin producing genes. So again, this is why this makes it so challenging for us. Next slide. So this is to get at your question earlier. So basically, these cyanobacteria blooms are very dynamic through time. The image is just looking at Lake Erie, a big satellite image, but you can see how variable the bloom is in the water around Lake Erie. But that happens even at a smaller scale in like our smaller inland lakes. And so one of the things is you can see like during a moderate breezy day, like lots of times with calm overnights, cyanobacteria will float to the surface. And when the wind picks up a little bit the next day, they'll be pushed to one side of the lake, right? But the problem is all the toxins aren't pushed with them. Any toxin that's not in the cell but in the water could stay where that originally came from. So that creates the challenge of, well, if I got a bloom on the south shore of Devil's Track Lake, is it on the north shore? Are toxins on the north shore as well? Really hard to tell unless you're measuring toxins themselves. And the other thing with these things being dynamic is, you know, they can float to the surface and be pushed downwind, but when the winds pick up later in the day, they could potentially shift direction and blow the blooms to the totally other side of the lake. So it's really hard to predict sometimes what those toxins level are just by looking at the water. Next slide, please. And this is one of the few graphics I'm actually going to show. But Janae Whitaker from the LS NER put this together in probably the best explanation I ever thought of this. So the first line is just looking at basically how green the water is, right? So this is a concentration of cyanobacteria in the water. You start very little and you move towards a peak bloom condition and then maybe it goes away, right? Advance. So if you're thinking about toxins that are only within the cells, right? Those toxins should follow what the greenness of the water's doing. The greener the water, the more toxins you could have in the cell. So it's offset a little bit, but it kind of follows that same trajectory, right? With peak biomass. Advance. But the big problem is we have these things called extracellular toxins. So when cyanobacteria are growing, they're also being parasitized by viruses. They're getting eaten by zooplankton, and all those toxins that were within the cell are lysing and breaking out into the open water. And that creates kind of this disconnect between the bloom and the greenness and the toxin concentrations in the water. Advance, please. And one of the ways you can kind of tell when a bloom is kind of disintegrating or decaying. So cyanobacteria have a pigment called phycocyanin. It's like chlorophyll A, but a little bit of a different pigment, but they use that to absorb light to undergo photosynthesis. But when that phycocyanin begins to get oxidized and broken down, it turns on to this brilliant blue color. And that's what that image is showing there. And this is where you can have the disconnect between the level of toxins in the water and kind of the biomass. And the bloom is when you start seeing that bloom decay and break down. Next slide. And the other thing is not all cyanobacteria have the capabilities to produce toxins, right? So this is just an image. Think about the circles, the green ones representing an algal cell like green algae or a diatom, and the cyan ones representing cyanobacteria. So you can have a smaller bloom so the water doesn't look as green, but if a higher proportion of those cells are toxin producing cyanobacteria, then you can have higher toxin concentrations than water that's greener but has less toxin producing cyanobacteria in it. So again, visually we can identify these things, but you can't really ID the toxin levels themselves. Next slide. And this was just a slide. This was research done by one of my graduate students, Leah Schleppenbach, with funding from Minnesota Sea Grant. But we looked at 6 lakes throughout the state of Minnesota. So we had our southern tier lakes. Near the Twin Cities, we had some kind of due west of Duluth. And then we had some, up here in White Iron and Tate Lakes. And one of the interesting things was that she was able to record detectable microcystins, which is a form of a toxin, in all the lakes that she studied, even the lakes that didn't look like they were under bloom conditions. So the good thing about this is the drinking water threshold for microcystins is 1. So if you look at that slide, most everything was below 1, and that's for direct drinking water ingestion. The recreational limit is 6 micrograms per liter. So everything was below that as well, except Pelcher. Pelcher was that lake I showed the image of earlier near the Twin Cities, and it consistently had some pretty high toxin levels that were above recreational guidelines. But still, it's just, we were kind of surprised that we were able to measure toxins in these lakes we were sampling that didn't look like there was a bloom present. Next slide. And this one, again, don't worry. This is just to say that microcystin is only one type of toxin. There's a whole host of other toxins: antitoxin A, saxitoxin, cylindrospermopsin. There's anabenopeptides, which we're not even sure what they do right now. So lots of times if we're gonna measure one toxin in a lake, we tend to study microcystin as like an indicator of potentially toxic conditions, but it's not a measure of total toxicity of that bloom, especially for cyanobacteria that produce other types of toxins. Next slide. And you don't need fancy instruments to measure toxins to get an estimate of what the levels of toxins are. This again was research done by Janae Whitaker out at the Lake Superior National Estuary Research Reserve. But Gold Standard Diagnostics makes these little test kits that to me remind me of like COVID tests that we're all pretty familiar with at this point. But you take a water sample, you undergo the process with this kit to lyse the cells, and then you can get an estimate of what those toxins look like. The QR tag is there if you want to go see this report. I'll also say that Hillary Sorensen from Minnesota Sea Grant and I got funding through the State Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund. We're going to be putting on these workshops beginning next year to train people how to use these kits. And I think these kits are kind of like a good way to triage whether or not there's potentially toxins in the sample. But in order to get like a true measurement, you would then have to send the sample to a lab. But these are a good way to at least get an estimate of what those toxin levels are. It says they break down at like $34 per test. But again, this might be something for a community or a lake association to, purchase these kits if there's a volunteer monitoring program, and then at least be able to have a way to get a sense of what the toxin levels look like. Next slide. All right, so the practical part, and I won't spend too long on this, but how can you protect yourself, your pets, your neighbors? Everyone likes to go tell their neighbor, you probably shouldn't go in there. I know better than you. It's like, okay, well, but trying to increase that public awareness of, these hazards. And then how can you contribute to help reducing CHABs? Next slide, please. All right. So the first one, if you suspect a HAB, you can report those. One of the new tools that they're using in the state of Minnesota is this app called Bloom Watch. This was an app developed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to go ahead and track blooms countrywide. But these apps are only as good as the user community that supports them. So I think one of the good things was like, if I went to a lake and I'm like, that water looks a little green, I wonder if someone else has reported a bloom here, had questions. You could go to this app and then see if there's been a bloom previously reported. So I think that's helpful. And then if you also report the bloom, that could potentially help the next person. I think this is a newer recommendation by the Minnesota Department of Health. I don't know how long they've been promoting this, maybe a year, maybe two. But again, we're trying to build support for this app just to help us best protect people, because when they're trying to manage, statewide, it's really hard to have a good sense of what's going on with each of the communities and lakes within the state. So again, this is where you could directly help keep people safe. Next slide. And there's a whole host of things you can do to try to help reduce harmful algal blooms, or should I say, there's a whole lot of management solutions that have been devised to help reduce these. I used to run an undergraduate seminar at Iowa State where the goal for the undergraduate students was find something you can buy online that says it'll help you reduce harmful algal blooms, and we'll go through the science of it and see whether or not it makes sense. And there was a lot of laughter that came out of that, because there's some products out there that people are selling that you're just like, I don't see how that's gonna help, but I'm sure they probably made some money doing it. But there are ways that you can directly help. There's ways you can help. There's ways the county can help. There's ways that municipalities can help. So it really depends on what the situation is in that specific lake, what's going to be the most effective approach. Next slide. So personally for landowners, one of the things we know that's effective is by reducing nutrients. Less nutrients, less harmful algal blooms. So you can think about this, about putting nutrients on your lawn and things like that. So fertilize only when needed. If you don't know that you need to fertilize, you should probably get a soil test. The University of Minnesota Extension, I don't know where their office is up here.
We have one at the community center. Yeah.
Perfect, there you go. But I'm pretty sure that they give free soil tests if you request one. If it's not free, don't send me the bill, but I think it is free. And they'll help you and tell you what your soil needs to be amended with for things to grow. Mostly with terrestrial plants, they need nitrogen and they need potassium. They don't need phosphorus. And phosphorus tends to be the limiting nutrient in aquatic ecosystems, so more phosphorus, more green in the water, which we don't want to see. So using phosphorus-free fertilizer only is a good way to start. You can look at the NPK ratio on any bag of fertilizer you buy. I think in Iowa, I don't think you could buy fertilizer with phosphorus in it directly at like a Lowe's or something like that. I don't know what the reg is here in Minnesota. That's something I'll look into, but normally phosphorus-free fertilizer. Don't fertilize near shorelines. You know, we had a lot of lakes that I've been around recently. Green grass all the way up to the seawall. Fertilizer directly sometimes going into the water. That's something we want to avoid. Keeping the grass clippings out of the water, things like that. And picking up pet waste. Pet waste has a lot of phosphorus in it. It's the weirdest thing, but someone studied this, right? Like manure, sewage, dog poop has a lot of fertilizer in it. So pick up your poop. There is no poop fairy. I love that thing, Poop Fairy University. Go to it. You can learn about how to reduce this. Next slide, please. The other way you can help is trying to capture the nutrients before they get in the water, right? So when we think about this, we think about stormwater management. So things like rain barrels, rain gardens, shoreline buffers, and setbacks, all of that can help intercept the nutrients before they get into the water or run off your land. I know I've seen some beautiful rain gardens in the past that I've been jealous about, like communities that have put these in, and they do look pretty spectacular. Next slide. Properly maintaining septic systems is good to make sure that they're actually treating the nutrients before it's going out. And I got to admit, so I am a new septic system owner since I moved to Minnesota. I was always on municipal water and sewage my entire life. So when I had to have them put in a new septic system when I bought my house and my property, because the old one was not so good, I learned a lot about maintaining septic systems, and it is a process and it does take a little bit of work. But you can get Septic Smart. You can go to that QR tag there through University of Minnesota Extension, and they got some good tips on that. Next slide. And finally, just thinking stormwater management is a community effort. There's things you can do. There's things that are a little bit bigger scale that you need help with county, state, all that stuff. But collectively, all these things can really help reduce the nutrients running off into our receiving waters. Next slide. And this is the last summary slide. You know, cyanobacteria, they are this threat to our health, but also to our habitat and our fisheries. They're anticipated to get worse in the future under climate change, so it's really good to try to get a handle on these things now, or at least be proactive if there's certain areas where they are becoming like an emerging threat. You can identify a bloom, but you can't identify a toxic bloom, right? So you cannot see the toxins in the water. You can help increase awareness simply by reporting And also, you know, doing your part for reducing nutrients going into the lakes and helping fuel these cyanobacteria blooms. There's many ways you can do that individually, or you can work with your community to do that. Next slide. That is all I got today. I'm happy to answer a bunch of questions. Sorry I went a little bit long, but anyhow, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any research on like if there's an algae bloom in a lake that it's gonna affect groundwater aquifers or wells?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just gave a talk on this last week and I got the same exact question. And right now, I don't think we've seen any evidence of that anywhere. You know, I think it would have to be a really shallow well, and there would have to be high connectivity between that surface water and the well to worry about. But nowhere do I know that they're mandating toxin testing for well water. I know I don't do it at my house, but yeah, I don't think I've seen it be a concern anywhere. Yeah.
Last year at Devil Trek, we had a bunch of blooms. Never anything like it in my experience.
Yeah.
For the last, God, I don't know, 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and we did collect it with the fruit jar and
Yep.
set it up, and it bloody well floated nicely.
So,
How effective is that float test? Is that pretty certain then? If it's floating, it's bad stuff?
if it's floating, it's cyanobacteria. Whether or not it's toxic, that we don't know.
Oh, you don't? That's nothing to do with being toxic, just
Yeah.
that cyano. Oh, I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, because cyanobacteria have these little, basically they're like gas bladders that they
Right.
can fill up with air and just float to the top.
Yeah,
And other algae don't have that. Like diatoms have these heavy glass walls, so they tend to sink pretty rapidly. So that's good, very diagnostic for it being cyanobacteria,
But
but
that's all.
again, yeah, we don't
but
know.
there's
if it's
no
toxic.
quick handy rule of thumb test that says it's toxic.
I think how we're looking at now, I think trying to get some of those toxin test strips would be the way to go. But yeah, there's no real rule of thumb. I see this in the water, I know there's toxins.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't have anything like that. I know there's people trying to use like multispectral imaging and stuff like that to try to see if like a certain wavelength of light
Right.
can go ahead and correlate with toxins, but
Not.
no, nothing yet.
We had a kit that did use photocell and transmission and
Yeah.
percent transmission and all that,
Yeah.
but that wouldn't help at all.
So was that just looking at turbidity or was that looking at like chlorophyll
It
level?
wasn't specific. We could look at many different things depending on the reagent you
Yeah.
put into the test cylinder, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And that was when I was teaching school and we had
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
But it was not an expensive kit. And I
Yeah.
was thinking if that would have multi-use and if it was possible,
Yeah.
not.
for
For these test strips,
Yeah.
when you talked about those, looking back here, gold standard, is that where you get these?
yeah, gold standard diagnostics is like the big one these days. And in the report that Janae did, there's other, you can go on Amazon and you can search blue-green algae test and you can buy something that looks like a COVID kit
Yeah.
to tell you whether or not there's toxins present in the water or not. But tell you the truth, it really wasn't clear what they were actually correlating that to. And when Janae did her test, she didn't find really good agreement between those tests and actually measured toxins in the lab.
So the best thing we could do would be to take a sample and
Yeah.
send it in somewhere.
Or take a sample and have some test kits on hand
Yeah,
and then run those test kits. And if you get a hit, then I would be like, okay, let's send these into a lab for actual analysis. The problem with that is it takes the labs time to turn them around,
and but
which is not good when you have people recreating, people up for the weekend at your, you know, your place and you're like, oh, okay, well, we got to sit this out for a couple days.
and even if we took them out to the middle of the lake where there was no apparent bloom, there still could be toxins there.
Yeah, I think you would have to like get a whole sense of what's going on in the entire lake. Like if you go out and it's clear water in the middle of the lake, but there's no bloom forming on any shoreline or anything like that, or you haven't heard any
Oh, yeah.
reports, then you would be in decent shape.
I get that.
But if you see the big blooms
If
happening.
there is a bloom all the
yeah,
way around the lake,
Yeah.
it's still, and nothing in the middle, it still could be there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's the challenge we're dealing with right now. We're working on several ways to try to get better at that. I know I'm going to be working on a project starting next year where we look at the microcystin genes and quantify those pretty rapidly to see whether or not there's the potential for toxins in a water sample. But again, this is kind of like up and coming technology that just isn't commercially available now. Yeah.
Well, my little dog took 2 laps from, I couldn't grab her, she was immediately sick,
Oh, no.
immediately sick. She didn't
Oh,
die
no.
or anything. She
Yeah.
threw up all over the backyard for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took that as a test of toxicity.
Yeah, I think it.
Not sure your dog appreciates.
No,
that.
no, I didn't.
Yeah,
Check this out.
I think when that happens, one of the things to do is when they come out, just to try to wash them
Yeah.
off. Because if they're in like green water and then that water dries on their fur,
That's
they start licking their fur afterwards. And that's when they have all the concentrated cells with the intracellular toxins that they're just licking straight off their fur. So if you can wash them before that, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, well, we sent out notices to the people, residents, not
Good.
the dogs in the water, but, you know,
Yeah.
there's all the people say this is the Merc, I need the thing I want, you know,
Yeah,
they do it anyway, so.
yeah. Well, it's good that you did that. Yeah.
Has there been any research for how long the toxin stays in the lake after the bloom occurs?
It's all gonna depend on the flushing time of the lake, I think. I do know there's been research where they've looked and recovered toxins from sediment cores, like hundreds of years old. So they tend not to break down all the way through microbial, like just chomping on them and stuff. So they can stay there, they can stay in surface sediments. With microcystis, Mike, which I showed you, those have these resting vegetative cells on the surface of the sediment of a lake. And when those get stirred up the next year, they just start going right away. So those toxins can persist for a while. I think the key is like if you have a lake that flushes out in 10 days, after a bloom's gone 10 days from them, then you should be in pretty decent shape. But you should also see that toxin concentration being diluted out too, right? So it's not that it's just totally gone, but you just want it below those thresholds. So there's not like a hazard, right? So I think that would be key. But for some of these lakes that, you know, year after year have toxins, there's probably just always toxin present in that water. Yeah.
So it's important to keep those 250 horsepower motors from going 70 miles an hour, 10 feet
Yeah.
off the shore.
Yeah, I've heard about the report. Yes, yeah,
And the wake boats,
yep, the wake
we have
boat.
mortars for a lake.
Yeah, try not to stir up those sediments, because even if you're not getting like cyanobacteria and toxins coming off of it, you're getting all those nutrients being stirred up, and those can then fuel the next wave of a bloom.
Curious if these blooms are getting reported and added to like the DNR's Lake Finder database where people go to get lake
Yeah,
data.
yeah. You know, that's a good idea. I don't know if I've ever heard that brought up in a meeting before.
That's a good question.
But yeah, that would be something to talk to Minnesota Department of Health or MPCA about.
Well, the DNR database, isn't it? Because like,
Yep.
you wanna go and find out like what fish are in this lake or.
Yeah.
It'd be
Yeah.
interesting to have a lake where you could look up and see the history, you know,
Yeah.
reported and confirmed, or. if that's-
Yeah. I think what you would have to have is maybe a warning on lakes where you get the recurring blooms. But the lakes where you, one year you'll get a bloom, but not the next year, I think there would be caution in reporting that, just because at that time, when someone's there and looks at the app, you may not know whether or not a toxic bloom is there. And then if someone gets sick and you're like, we've never seen a bloom there before, that would create a challenge.
Is there one go-to database for?
No, I think it's gonna be that, Bloom Watch app.
I just downloaded it.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the one they're gonna try to steer people towards. So we'll see. I don't know. In putting together this talk, this was the first time I really dug in and saw that they were supporting use of Bloom Watch. I know I've worked with EPA on it for a while and been hearing about it for years because they use it out on the East Coast quite a bit. But it looks like they're trying to adopt it more nationwide now, just for reporting.
Is there a place I could go to find out what the flush time for my lake is?
Yeah, I'm trying to wonder if it's probably in a DNR database somewhere. Probably not on Lake Finder though.
So the DNR would be a place to start.
Yeah, DNR or MPCA would be a place to look. Normally lakes have a pretty decent,
Well, we have a good
Resident
inlet and a good outlet.
yeah. But if it's not like a flow through system, like a river reservoir or something like that, normally the flushing time is usually pretty long in some of these systems. So you would just have to look at what it
It's
is.
a river in and a river out, so.
Yeah.
I don't
But
know.
hopefully it gets pretty wide in the middle and like I grew up on like reservoirs in Texas where, you know, sometimes they're just like flood control structures, but basically what comes in goes like straight out. But the lakes up here tend to have that longer residence time to them.
Okay.
But I would check with MPCA. You could also shoot me an email and just say, hey, check out this lake. I may have it in a database already. Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be another way. Yeah.
So we sample for phosphorus a lot in our lakes, and there's been some research happening about the effect of nitrogen
Yeah.
on cyanobacteria.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a valuable thing to sample for in our lakes?
Yes, right now there's this huge debate in management about like phosphorus only management versus dual nutrient management, nitrogen and phosphorus. I tend to fall on the dual nutrient side of things because there are lakes where there's so much phosphorus coming into them that the nitrogen tends to be an issue. And lots of the research has shown that typically you see co-limitation in lakes. So you raise phosphorus, algae goes up, you raise nitrogen, algae goes up, you raise both together and algae goes through the roof, right? So they're both having an impact. For cyanobacteria directly, what we tend to worry about though is the imbalance of nitrogen and phosphorus. So when nitrogen levels are low relative to phosphorus, lots of cyanobacteria can fix their own nitrogen source through these specialized cells called heterocytes. So they tend to outcompete everything when nitrogen is limiting. So every time I try to assess ecosystem health, I'm doing both nitrogen and phosphorus because it's really good to get a sense of really what's driving productivity in that system. And even if it is still phosphorus limited, at least you have the nitrogen numbers to kind of back that up. And you can look at that through time to see if there's going to be any shifts there. Yeah.
One of those lakes you tested in Cook County, Tate's one of our sentinel lakes, isn't it? I thought that was funny that it showed up there. It'd be interesting to know if some of that impact was strictly from development, or was it all from development, or? I mean, I'm just curious, so Sentinel
Yeah.
Lake, I think we only have 2 or 3,
I
right?
think we have 3.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of weird that you hit one of those during that testing.
Yeah, and the reason we went to Tate Lake is because we were building off of a previous study done like 5 years earlier that said they noticed visible blooms on Tate Lake. But when we were out there during this 2-year study, I never really saw a visible bloom out there whatsoever.
So all this stuff is relatively recent, last 10 years?
Yeah, so that project would have been, yeah, that project actually started right up during COVID. Yeah, so like 2021.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What are the Sentinel lakes? I don't know that.
Oh, that's the Minnesota program where they have uh, lakes throughout the state that they're frequently monitoring to see how they're changing due to mostly due to climate change is kind of what it's geared towards. But also land use change. And one of the things that I had another graduate student looking at trends in the Sentinel Lakes data and stuff like that. Even though these are Sentinel lakes, in some of the lakes, there is active management within the watershed, which I was kind of surprised to think about because I'm like, we're just trying to look naturally at how these lakes are responding to climate and things like that. So I thought they were set aside for no management interventions. But some of them actually had, I can't remember the one lake I'm thinking of, but it had a pretty long history of management within its watershed.
How many are there? Just
Oh, God. 30-ish? Yeah, and there's tier 1 lakes and tier 2 lakes, and tier 1 is monitored more frequently and tier 2 less so. But yeah, I think there's about 30-ish throughout the state. Yeah. It is a cool program though that Minnesota has that lots of other states don't have that I know of. So,
Well, I think if there's no questions online with that, maybe we will take a break. It is 10 after, so 10 minutes. So at 2:20, 1:20, 2:20,
there we go.
we'll reconvene. So
All right. Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm around if you have any more questions.
Goodness, thank you. All right, so I'm not going to talk too much about some of this because a lot of this I know a lot of you know. But when you're looking at your vegetation and when you're looking at what do I do on my property, what in the world's going on with my neighbors, a lot of our landscapes are downhill straight into the lake. And as you know, lake to lawn is not a good thing. So think about, up top, I'm going to mitigate as much as I can around that house. I may be putting in rain gutters to rain barrels. I may be putting in rain gutters to direct that water off into the woods. It's one of the number one things we often see is that water just shooting down into the lake, especially on Lake Superior properties. It's notorious that water is just flowing straight into the Lake Superior. So think about building your landscape from the top down. You're looking at having buffers. You're looking at what's my transition area? Where's my buffer right along the lake? Do I have an airstrip or do I have a gentle path going down into the lake? You can go to the next slide. All right, you can click because it's gonna. So when you think about that top down on your landscape, think about also the vegetation right there. This is from a workshop we did a number of years ago. You're gonna think about the fact that trees are really important for the landscape. Even if it's, and put shrubbery in, just all that vegetation, it allows for transpiration. It's absorbing the water in the soils. It's helping to mitigate different nutrients. It needs that to grow. Think about it slowing the runoff down as you have those trees, and then you want to be able to maybe see the lake. So you have more of that shrubs and other vegetations, and then those roots are helping to hold things in. Again, it's all part of, as a lot of you know, it's holding those nutrients on the landscape so that they don't enter the water. But thinking again, instead of landscape down, think height down. Trees, shrubbery, vegetation, lower vegetation like grasses and different forbs and things and flowers. And a lot of you have heard me speak a lot, so I'm not going to do most of the talking today. I'm just doing a quick overview. Also, we always like to say, just stop mowing. Stop mowing for at least a year. A lot of times we go out to properties and we'll say 15 feet back, put a line, a few flags, and see what grows. And it may take a year or two, but a lot of the soils have seeds already in them. They've just been mowed and mowed and mowed and mowed. So it's going to take time for things to revegetate. The forest often will start to come back into the area. And then you can say, okay, I don't want these invasive plants, pull those out, treat those, but you can also just put a trail in then. Look at, evaluate your area and just let it grow. That's the cheapest, the easiest way to help filter out those nutrients. And right in front of your property, you'll probably have happier lake water. Also assess the area. So, you know, we use this one. This is a different lake. We use this slide for a different reason, but when you look at it and you're like, well, what do I do? You know, and so it's a tricky one. Did you? It's not. What did you ask?
That's Wolfgang's front yard.
It's very similar, but it's not.
Isn't
It's
it?
not. No.
It's got a black pipe on the left side. It's got stump.
So this is a common lakeshore in Cook County. So now what do you do? Right? So what do? You know, this one is gonna need some treatment for the spruce budworm. You see some trees there, but it needs some vegetation, right? And even down along that lakeshore, there's some there, but you know, you have to look at what's the slope look like, what can grow there. You see there's some sun hitting to the far end of the picture. There's vegetation growing there. So it's not always as easy as stop mowing, right? Because obviously he's not mowing anything and nothing's growing. So it's a matter of trying to assess the area, looking at what could grow, what do I need to mitigate? I know I've got dead trees here. I know that trees are really going to help water quality. So maybe I need to take a few down and reseed or revegetate or just do different options. Our office has some great technicians that could come out and offer some of that expertise. I'm going to put a plug in for them because this is not my area of expertise anymore. And so let them come out and help you determine, can things grow? What could grow here? So as we mentioned, site conditions, you need to look at your shoreline. That doesn't also, you know, think about rivers. If you live on a river, you have a friend, a neighbor that lives on the rivers, those rivers are flowing into the lakes. If they're being inundated with sediment, that sediment has to go somewhere. And it's going to go into the lake. As we all know, we watched a 1 to 2 inch rain event in 20 minutes this weekend, and that lake was brown. So as much as we can do to mitigate those streams also going into it. So when we say riparian area, we're thinking both lakes and streams. You're going to look at, is it wet? You know, is it on a bluff? Is it a lot of disturbed fill? Is there rocks? What can grow? What is my area? And we go out and we look and we say, well, what's growing naturally right beside it? You know, you don't need to, it's not hard, but look and see what's growing and then what can you get to grow into your area. Think about your sun exposure, think about your shading. Are you gonna be able to water an area? So if you have a buffer and you're inserting a buffer to help mitigate some of these strategies to help with your bacteria blooms, can you water it? That's often a thing. We'll go out and people can't water it and then they're dead and then they're all upset. And so how do we figure out that? Slope and drainage and bedrock are big issues up here, especially the farther you get up into the county, up by the Gunflint area. They don't have the soils, but things will grow. So if you're in there and you've got no soil, you have to look farther up in the lakescape. You need to plant those trees and ensure that there's something there to help contribute to those buffers. And so best management practices are just going to be key, which you all know, and I know this because I've known most of you for a very long time. We always just recommend, again, I'm going to hammer these home, stop mowing. Just stop mowing, let nature do its thing. We recommend a minimum of a 15-foot buffer. I know that seems far, but all it's going to take is, I don't know, it not to work or somebody to come in and say, I'm going to start mowing, and it slowly starts to shrink. Seen that a lot. And so 15 feet's a nice long girth, and then just put a trail in. Put a couple trails in if you need to. Don't use any fertilizers. We're not in a park. We're in nature. We're out here where this is what our lakes are meant to be, which is low nutrients. Keep your trees. Again, those trees help with transpiration. They help to filter that water. They're going to help reduce those nutrients going in there. Shrubbery. You don't want trees. There's a ton of shrubs. We know how to help you propagate. If you're like, I don't have a lot, we can teach you how to propagate red osier dogwood and willow. It's not that hard, and just plant it right. Plant it. It's a resilient. They're the resilient plants. Maintaining your septic system. Amazing thing. That's the bathroom, if you're wondering. Those who can't hear that, sorry, the bathrooms are very loud at the city hall, so it can be a bit distracting.
This has been the whole time.
So, it can be a bit distracting when you're here.
Blowing under the door.
Not a lot of soundproofing in this. Oh. But anyway, it's perfect timing. So we're talking about septic systems. So make sure that they're maintained. There are programs in the county to help if you're a year-round resident and you meet that qualification to provide at least a $10,000 grant for those septic systems. And the qualifications, they try to bump it up as high as they can to provide a grant for folks that are year-round. There's also loans. It's a 3% fixed 3% loan for 10 years that can go on your taxes. So there's options out there to try to help people because we have a shortage of sand and we have, it's expensive to put a septic system in. Again, have a trail down to that water, not an airstrip. It is heartbreaking. Sometimes to go out and see just everything mowed down, no matter what the slope is. And you just know that there's no gutters and there's just tons of just sheet flowing going straight into the lake. So reduce that airstrip down to a strip, a tiny little strip. Manage your stormwater on your property, as Chris mentioned earlier. You can do rain gardens, put in gutters, direct that stormwater so it's not going towards the lake, but maybe not also towards your neighbors. So it can be tricky because you can impact your neighbors. And we've seen it up. We see this a lot more in Lake Superior because the lots are smaller. Folks are redirecting that water and it goes right into their neighbor's channel, but then it's too much water and it's starting to erode your property. So thinking about, you know, stormwater management on your property and really looking at your area and where is it maybe naturally flowing, what can you do with it? Encourage your neighbors, your other folks around you to take care of the land and protect the water. We all know that that can be really tricky, but sometimes that cup of coffee, that barbecue, whatever, just having that conversation can make a huge difference. There's a lot of lake associations doing some really great things of just trying to reach the neighbors. So thank you for all that you're doing. And then we are happy to help you as much as we can for assistance. We do free technical site visits. We have a very, very small amount of cost share funding that we can provide, but it's really related to, it has to be a water quality issue because our funding has become so restricted and so small moving forward from this year, moving forward. And so we've had to really be mindful of how we can use that funding. And we're also a year out for being able to provide funding when we can. So we just have a very small staff, but we're happy to provide that technician assistance if you need it. With that, go ahead, I think that's it. Okay. With that, so you know that there's strategies you can use to help your land. I gave you the bird's eye view because I've talked a lot about this over the years and spoken with a lot of you. There's also that, which we try to do is support what happens with the ordinances. So when variances come through, Max often, I'm going to put Max not on the spot, but he is our technician and he will write letters to support those variances, not to support them necessarily, that's not maybe that word, but to support the science behind it. Like, you know what, you are building on, we're gonna pick one of the vegetable lakes. Isn't there a carrot lake or something? Carrot Lake, nobody lives on that one. And that water quality is pretty good. So we're gonna definitely recommend that you build far enough back, no matter what, but this is why. And because the water quality is good, it doesn't have any impacts, but maybe it's phosphorus sensitive, which means if you add just a little bit more phosphorus, that lake is not going to recover. And so he's going to add some of that science in there and some of those resources. And so we want to work. We're not law, we're not enforcement, we're not regulations, but we want to help support what Land Services does. And so we really try to work together. So if you ever are applying for variances, you will see that there's often a letter if it corresponds to water quality so that we're able to support their work. And not to be the no person, but to give that option for different management practices and a different way to look at it. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Neva so she can talk more about what that looks like on the ordinance side.
Because everybody loves talking about rules. Thanks, Elena. We just figured a great way to end up talking about science is to talk about rules, right? Okay. Well, you're supposed to laugh more, but. Okay. So, for those of you that don't know me, go ahead and go to the next slide. Elena, my name
Do that, sorry.
is Neva Maxwell. I am the Planning and Zoning Administrator in the Land Services Department. So our job in Land Services is to carry out the administration of several county ordinances, one of which includes the zoning ordinance and the septic ordinance and the subdivision ordinance, all which have touch points when it comes to land use and water. So go ahead to the next slide.
Trying.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Okay, cool. Just for starters, for those of you that don't know me, my background, I started off working for a soil and water conservation district 15 years ago in Carleton County doing water restoration work, a lot of water quality grant work. Actually, I knew Elena back then. She's probably one of the longest standing professional relationships I have. So from there, I had a lot of student loans, so I couldn't keep working for a soil and water district. I had to go down to the cities for a dark period of time. It wasn't really dark, but it was the cities. It's not so much my jam, but it was a really great experience. I worked for the city of Shoreview. I was their natural resources officer there. Then bounced my way back up to the North Shore, worked for Lake County for several years, and then came up to Cook County. I was recruited and have been here happily ever since. And so this is our home. Very happy to be here. Locally, I'm involved on the search and rescue squad, cooperation station board, trying to support daycare, and I participate in Toastmasters, trying to get better at my public speaking for moments like this. So, but overall, you know, the last 10 years of my nuts and bolts have been land use regulation for the North Shore, the Arrowhead region between Lake and Cook counties. Go to the next one. So first off, I was hoping, you know, people in person here and also online, if you want to chime in. Part of my presentation, because I'm talking about rules, is I was hoping to get some of your guys' engagement on this. So to whatever degree, we've had a lot of information for the last hour and a half thrown at you. So I just kind of wanted to pull out some of like the key takeaways, like what you guys have learned from cyanobacteria, or, you know, what Elena was talking about, best management practices. We kind of marry those two subjects together. What do you think are the things you'd really like to remember or pull away from what you learned from the first two talks? And also there are people online, so if any online people want to unmute themselves, we'd really love to hear your take also. So who wants to take the first crack at it?
Caribou Lake managed to get the law to say that they couldn't have wake boats on that lake.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, couldn't the law say that you can't fertilize if you live on a lake?
You have jumped ahead two key parts of my presentation, Wilkes, I believe. I'm not quite there yet, so I'm still baby stepping this. First, we're gonna recoup what we've learned, then we're gonna see what we've observed, and then we're gonna talk about the future and what ifs.
I've got all that stuff right here, see, but I, no questions.
All right, anybody online, anything that you gathered from cyanobacteria, kind of like key takeaways from lakes, lake biology type stuff that you want to share with us?
Feel free to unmute because of the way our platform is, I can't see if have your hand raised. So unmute and start talking. You can't see you counting.
Count to 10.
No, this is my, okay. All right, no one wants to participate. That is fine, except for Mr. Wilkes. I will give you a shot coming up here soon.
Yeah, I'll wait.
Oh, you have another.
Yeah.
I think just that it's complicated, more complicated than we thought, and I guess I learned the difference between the cyanobacteria and algae, and that they're different, and also just to stay out of the water for a while after this has happened, and hopefully that we'll be getting more tools to know better what's happening. And yeah, I think just that because soil and water can't enforce things, we need other policy ordinance mechanisms to address this stuff.
Great. Good. It is complicated. I think, you know, we like really hard and fast rules, but it is kind of refreshing to hear with science, like we still don't actually know a couple of things, or there's things that are breaking the rules that we thought were rules. So I think some of the key takeaways I took when I think about cyanobacteria that I want to think about in the future, I was thinking about extreme rainfall events followed by droughts. Like that's something that cyanobacteria is really going to thrive in. And when I've had the state climatologist office do some presentations, and they talk about Minnesota's weather patterns and how that's changing. That's one thing that they talk about is we're getting these really intense rain events that are flushing everything off the landscape that are then followed by droughts. And so, you know, I think that's really interesting hearing those different specialists mirror each other for that. And also warmer water. You know, that warmer water is more habitable. Those are like my key takeaways from Chris's very good piece. There's a lot more, Chris. But so we'll go on to the next one, Elena. Thank you. I was going to also point out that everything I'm going to talk about with rules here, I want to emphasize about Cook County, Minnesota. Okay, these rules may not apply exactly to a different county in Minnesota or definitely not a different state. So for those of you that have land in other places, keep in mind that a lot of regulations are specific to whatever area we're talking about. So I'm going to give you a very high level 101 about rules first, so give us a good platform, hopefully for some discussions. So rules can come from the federal government, for example, the Clean Water Act, and state government as well. So we have state shoreline rules, Wetland Conservation Act, septic regulations, all of those come from the state of Minnesota. The legislator creates statute, and then the legislator says, hey, state agencies, create rules from the statute that we just laid out. So then rules are what lay out the next set of to-dos. And then locally, we will often adopt those state rules into our local ordinances with a little extra local flavor that our constituents kind of want to see reflected in the application of those rules. At the county, we cannot be more relaxed than what the state says. So if the state says you have to do this, we can't say, well, we don't want to quite do that much. We can be more restrictive than the state, but we can't be less restrictive than the state. Go ahead, Elena. So when we talk about shoreland, shoreland is very clearly defined in state rules. So when I talk about shoreland, this is all the land within 1,000 feet of a lake or 300 feet of a river. And then, because we're special in Cook County, the North Shore Management Zone along Lake Superior is a stair-step pattern along the North Shore. So that's also shoreland along Lake Superior. And when we talk about who is in charge of what, you know, if you're in the water, who's the regulator? If you're on the land, who's the regulator? The ordinary high water level is the line in the sand, so to say, of who is in charge of regulations. So there's this term ordinary high water level. I'm only referring that because it's on all the slides. So I just wanted you to see that that term exists. But we can use the word shoreline because that's a very similar term. So shoreline, below the shoreline, so in the water, you can go to the next slide, is going to be the DNR or the Army Corps of Engineers, specifically the DNR most typically. And then if you're on the land, that's where the county or the city is the local government unit that's responsible for regulations. So anytime you're on the land, it's the county. Anytime you're in the water, it's the DNR. There is nuance to this, but I just wanted to try to give you a very, very high level understanding of who's in charge of what. This is for also state wetland regulations as well. That's kind of what that original slide is for. But just kind of keep in mind, that's why sometimes people will call our office and say like, oh, if someone is dumping sand on their shoreline and they're trying to create a beach. That's actually not a county issue, that's a DNR issue. But then if someone calls and says, oh, they're removing all the trees along the shoreline, now that's a county issue, not a DNR issue. So it's all about where the shoreline is. That's marking whose jurisdiction it is. Go ahead, Alina. I kind of bucketed our shoreline regulations into 4 things. It could have been a lot more things, but I was trying to keep this very relatively high level. If I'm going to hit the top things that our shoreline regulations cover, this will be it. So we cover structure setbacks, stormwater management, shoreline vegetation alterations, and septic system compliance. I'm hoping that by being the third person to be talking today, that you guys might be hearing some echoed themes among some of these regulations with some of our presentations earlier. Go ahead, Alina. So the first thing that's outlined in our Cook County zoning ordinance is structure setback. So for those of you that can't see that table very well, this is just a screenshot from our zoning ordinance that outlines the different classifications of public waters. So different rivers and different lakes have different classifications. There's essentially 3 types of lakes. So you have general development, recreational development, and natural environment. And based off of what lake you have that's classified that way depends on the development standards. So like a lake down in the middle of the Twin Cities, do you think that would be a natural environment lake usually? Probably not. That's general development. It is kind of created in a way that's going to anticipate high development, high recreational value. Natural environment lake are a lot of the lakes that just don't have development up here. That's kind of the default for, it's good wildlife lake and natural environment as it's themed. So the majority of our lakes in Cook County are recreational development, which is kind of like the one in the middle. And then, so these classifications of lakes will designate how far a structure can be from the lake, as well as how wide a lot width can be. And can any of you guys surmise why you'd want to regulate lot width at all?
Where you can put your septic?
Partially, yeah. Yep. It's like how much development can one property do? So if you allowed every lake to have 50-foot wide lots instead of maybe a 100-foot wide lot, that 50-foot wide lot is going to create twice the amount of development pressure, twice the amount of docks, twice the amount of septics, twice the amount of houses. So that lot width is a minimum for subdividing properties, and that kind of regulates just how dense of development we can have on lakes. So big picture is just because you hear a rule is on one lake, don't think that same rule applies to another lake. Depends on the classification of the lake. So just wanted to clue that in because a lot of people are unaware that we have different classifications of water bodies. And this comes from DNR original shoreline regulations. Go ahead, Alina. Shoreline alterations is kind of the second bucket of regulations that our office regulates for shoreline development. And you don't need to read this, but what I want you to pull away from it is that there are regulations against what we call intensive vegetative clearing. So it is not appropriate for a person just to clear all the vegetation on their shoreline and turn it into turf grass. So that would not be an appropriate management practice and would maybe be a land use violation. You'll notice I try not to speak in absolutes when possible because I just have learned not to, no matter how confident I am in a statement, plus this is being recorded. So read the ordinance and give me a call if you have a specific question. But yeah, shoreline vegetative clearing, you really have to be careful. Like Alina said, access paths are perfectly fine. Having some recreational areas down by the lake, perfectly fine. But we don't want to be seeing the transition or conversion of natural shorelines to grass. Go ahead, Alina. The third section is that stormwater management. So thinking about all that water runoff on your property, that is whenever it's coming from a built environment, so like a roof or a deck or a patio or a driveway, all of that stuff is stormwater. And so we have an impervious surface coverage requirement that does not allow a shoreline lot to have more than 25% of impervious surface coverage. So at least 75% of your property should be green in some form. So just hold on to that. I'm not going to say anything else about stormwater management because I'm going to lose you. So go to the next one. And then septic regulations. We kind of spoke about this a little bit. When I was thinking about how this correlates with our presentations here, kind of think there's two take-home points when it comes to shoreland and septic systems. First off, in Cook County, we have a lakeshore septic inspection program. We're kind of strategically lake by lake, we're going through and inspecting the septic systems on those lakes. So it's kind of a process that's been in place since the early 2000s in Cook County. That's one thing. And then the second thing is that in shoreland areas only, in order to get a land use permit, you have to have a valid certificate of compliance on your septic system. So even if someone's going to be building a deck, something that has nothing to do with their water usage on their property, we're going to be checking to see how long it's been since that septic system was inspected and passed its inspection. So a lot of people give us grief on that once in a while, but it does ensure that septic systems are getting updated or at least inspected on a fairly regular basis. All right, so land water connection. I just want to point out to people and reinforce this idea, just like what Chris and Elena said. What's happening on the land is going to then happen into the water. Starts from up and goes down, as Elena said. So we want to watch out for anytime that storm water is carrying nutrients and pollutants into the water. And you guys have said all these good things, so let's move on. So your second opportunity to participate in our last talk of the day, your experiences. I've heard some people's observations so far, and I'm hoping to hear from people in person as well as online. I'm curious what people have seen, if they're lakeshore owners on their lakes. How long have you been here? Tell me about what you've seen about lakes in Cook County and how they've changed over time since you've been here. I'd really like to capture and share some of the knowledge that you guys are thinking about in your minds. So anyone want to take a stab?
Want me to whiteboard it?
Oh, yeah, Elena's gonna whiteboard, and this will give us a good opportunity to improve our technological facilitation skills.
See how it works?
Yeah. But somebody can talk while Elena does that.
Well, they can.
I think so.
Well, I'm worried.
Go for it.
I've been on Devil Track for around 10 or 11 years, and as Elena knows, I've done the water testing for almost all that time. And we've gotten the kind of year-end reports, and it's quite clear that the state trophic index, of course, is rising. So we're not in as good a shape as we were 8 years ago, for sure. It's linear. It's got a shallow slope, but it's definitely the big one. And we always do the Zeki disc, and when I started, we had 10 feet, and we got 6.
So over your 10-year time frame of doing water quality monitoring on Devil's Track Lake, you're seeing a steady decrease in water quality.
Yes.
Yeah.
And last year we had catastrophic algal blooms, some of which were toxic, as we've all seen. And this year we started out in May with a bloom. Way too soon to have anything. It was like
Wow.
25 degrees out, and we had a bloom, and it was definitely there.
Do you think, when you think about the lakeshore users on Devil Track, or even like the recreational users, the guests on the lake, have you noticed or observed any differences over time from that side of things?
Well, wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I don't think it's the visitors.
Mhm.
As I said years ago, we have seen the enemy and they are us. We do it. We did it. We do it consistently. We fertilize, we mow, we do all that crap. And some people don't inspect their septic systems. I know a guy hasn't had it inspected for 20 years.
Yeah, and Devil's Track was one of our first lakes to participate in the Lakeshore Compliance Inspection Program. And changes can be really slow. It can be really hard to see that change on the landscape because it can be so incremental, a little bit over time. And Devil's Track has some of the oldest land use patterns in the county. It has all of those little man-made cove inlets along it that have been in place for so long that the DNR just recognized it as a part of the natural shoreline now.
But people are still doing that on the down low.
Yeah. And see what I said earlier about jurisdiction? You see how that one's not mine. I'd seek out the DNR on that one. But that is part of their job because that does affect the natural habitat of the riparian area. I'm curious, anyone online that wants to take a stab at sharing your experiences on your lakes?
Hi, this is Rory.
Yeah, Rory?
So, we've been here almost 20 years, I guess, and our structure was built over 15. But one thing that I noticed was that during the pandemic, we had a lot more use on the lake. And then as that kind of, as the pandemic kind of went away, then the usage kind of went back to what it was earlier. And that's what we saw in our lake.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, the recreational use from folks coming out of the area.
Oh, yeah. Jerry, do you remember this statistic that Dan gave at the Lakeshore annual meeting about how many properties or how many docks he counted around, like, do you remember that?
I wish I had it. One of the board members did a circuit of the lake and counted docks, boats, pontoon boats, lifts. And then, of course, he's been there 38 years, so he had the numbers from then.
Mhm.
And you should see that.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, How many pontoons? 216 pontoons
Oh my gosh.
on Devil Track Lake.
Mhm.
I don't remember how many speedboats and I don't remember how many jet skis, but I mean, it's just
Mhm.
huge.
Sure, yeah.
in
Yeah.
the number. And you know, it's a heavily used lake in theory, but when you look up at, I don't see many boats. I might see 2 boats a day. Cool.
Mhm.
Weekends, a few more.
Sure.
I don't see a lot of, but there's certainly stuff out there.
More jet skis.
The type of recreational stuff has changed.
Yeah, jet skis are the bane of my existence. Cause they're noisy and they don't follow they're not supposed to be on the shoreline, you know, they're just not.
Mhm.
And they're not supposed to be going 75 miles an hour when they're that close, and, but they do.
Mhm.
Because they're 14 years old and or whatever they are.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Anyone online that has any observations they want to share?
Based off of some of my site visits I go to, I've heard reports of trail lakes, seeing dramatic decreases in lake trout, perhaps
Oh,
due to development or climate change. The answer is really unknown.
some fisheries trend changes, which is a big part of our economy up here.
One thing I did notice about the caribou group, I mean, that lake was really kind of crappy. And it's really come a long way from what it was. But I thought it was interesting that I think it's one of the only lake associations we have that have a subordinate tax group. Am I right on that?
Yep.
So that's what gave them the power to say no wake boats, from what I kind of understand, or gave them somewhat. But I did find it interesting that they, they chose to increase their tax levy. And I think from the people I've talked to, they're really worried about the tip over point where there's more vacation rental than residence.
Mhm.
And I think that's why they bumped their tax increase up, was to try to at least get some revenue before they break that threshold
Mhm.
of true
Sure.
people living on it versus rentals. But that's a pretty remarkable success story that
Yeah.
caribou really was, because it was getting churned up and it was pretty horrible.
Mhm.
This
That's
is
what gives you
Jeannie
the power.
Anderson. This
Yeah,
is Jeannie Anderson, and I actually live on Caribou. And
Hi,
I'm part
Jeannie.
of the Caribou Lake Association. And part of the reason we increased our SSD was because we have rusty crayfish mitigation right now. Because we have a huge population coming in down the river from Pike Lake. So that's why we increased that tax amount.
That's a really great point, Jeannie. I think talking about invasive species, and one way to combat that Caribou Lake has taken is to take advantage of that subordinate service district.
Yeah, it's been very helpful for us, and we had a lot of meetings and conversations with our members, and just tried to see if people wanted to support that. And we were very fortunate that a lot of people did. So,
Cool.
and we have a very active association as far as lake health. We have one member who has been taking care of water quality and testing for, gosh, I don't know how long he's been here, but it's been many years. I'd say over 25 at least.
Great. So really good citizen participation on the lakes that we've talked about have relied upon citizen volunteers to do monitoring. And that gives us good quality information to monitor the trends that aren't going well or the trends that are going well. Go ahead, Max.
One thing I've seen in the past year and a half, specifically relating to balsam fir and spruce budworm, it seems like there's always a ring of balsam lying on our shorelines of most of our lakes in Cook County. So some lakes in the boundary water specifically are completely dead now. And nothing to replace those, so that has some sort of a nutrient impact as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. That was one of the things I took a note on for when we think about future conditions is our changing forest type. I recently went out to a property where it kind of looked like a bomb had gone off. All the trees had been removed. And I called the landowner. I was like, what's going on here? They said, oh, well, I had the foresters out. They cleared everything out because I had a bunch of spruce budworm. I was like, well, maybe one or two trees could have been salvaged, possibly. But I wasn't there beforehand, but maybe some education with our forestry professionals to kind of talk about how we do this in a way that helps us. Because if we're gonna do this on a big scale in the county, have big forest transitions, we need to be strategic about it as a whole. Big changes with conversions. Last call for any other observations that people want to share? There's one thing in the chat, Elena.
Yeah, that's, I'm fixing this.
Greenwood Lake.
Yep.
Great. All right. Well, we can go on. Thank you everyone for sharing. I think that's really helpful. I see changes in like kind of some invasive species sort of stuff. There's some technology things. Some civic engagement is increasing in many ways that I think is helping a lot. We can dig into that a little bit more.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right. So, and just a refresher on your mind. Oh, we gotta do the
Oh, sorry.
whole thing again. We're starting from the top. Hi, everyone. My name is Eva.
Get up.
All right, so just kind of thinking about three versions of shorelines here. So you've got a natural shoreline, very minimal nutrient input because you're not getting a lot of runoff that's carrying sediment that's then carrying those nutrients. The middle picture is kind of in the middle, and then the last picture on the side. Once you have all those hard surfaces, there's really nothing to stop the flow of sediment. That's going right into the lake, carrying all the things, because nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, they attach onto dirt particles. That's how they transport when we talk about stormwater. So you got a piece of dirt clings onto that fertilizer or that poop, and then it gets carried into the lake. So go ahead. Just a refresher, Alina touched on this a lot. So healthy shoreline. What is a healthy shoreline? We really want to be seeing a nice, healthy, natural vegetation. This is the dream, is that first 50 feet or more from the lake would be a natural shore impact zone where all of your land use impacts are being offset by nature, essentially, for free. And then your structure is set further back and you have that space in between for your recreation use. So that's the dream, just the model.
Some problems with the slides. Hang on.
Okay. I'll just let that percolate into the universe a little bit more. And then the next set of things I'm going to have for you are some photos. These are just photos from the county's parcel map, so I could go to some lakes and grab some screenshot of some properties. And it's a flurry of different lakes throughout the county. And I'm looking for people to chime in on what they think is good, bad, or ugly on any of these photos. And we'll see this in a little moment. Sorry, everyone, we're getting used to new things.
This is a whole, we're working through it.
Growing pains. All right, looking at the following lakeshore aerial photos, what do you notice? Go to the next one.
Yep. Turn.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, so here's a shoreline. So you've seen what a healthy shoreline should look like. What are we seeing here?
No buffers.
Yeah, not much vegetation here, is there?
No.
No gutters.
No gutters.
Escape.
Yep. Can't really see the driveway very well because this is a non-growing season picture. So you're not going to see deciduous trees in this landowner's defense. You can kind of see some shadows where a couple of deciduous trees are, but this leaf off conditions. But yeah, you can kind of see the gravel hardscape there.
Sounds like we're back in business.
All right.
Let's see if we can get it to advance.
And people online, you can unmute and chime in at any point in time. We would love to hear your voices if you want to share. So here's another photo. What do we see here?
A straight path of hardscape right to the lake.
It is dead grass, so we wouldn't call it hardscape where the grass is specifically, but it is turf grass. It is lawn.
Yeah.
Yep.
This looks like a straight.
Yep. Yeah, these leaf off conditions pictures are a little harder, which is why I eventually did go to Google Map, right, when I was last minute fixing my slides. You want to go to the next one, Elena? What do we think about this shoreline?
Oh, yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
This one actually has a lot more deciduous trees over on the left side. This is my good example slide. So there's a mix of deciduous and evergreen trees here. The deciduous trees just don't show up very well, but these properties do have access paths going down to the water. And go to the next one, Elena.
Wow.
It looks a lot better in summer conditions. All these pictures should have been summer conditions if I was going to be more scientifically authentic about this process, but things look a lot better in the summertime. That one looks good. We all agree. You're probably not going to see a lot from the lake shore. Go to the next one.
Neva, can I chime in though?
Yeah.
Even though you showed like the non-summer pretty ones, we have snow melt up here. So even mitigating roofs and snow melt and like, again, where is that water going? It's things that maybe people should think about because if you have those steep driveways and it's just flowing right into the lake, then you push your snow right to the bottom after you've salted it. It's things to think about.
Yeah. Yep. That's okay. That's true. What do you think about this shoreline?
I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah. It's actually, these are much smaller lots. It's kind of an older development area. But overall, the property owners have maintained a lot of their tree cover and looks pretty darn good. Next one.
Oof.
Turf grass.
A lot of turf grass.
Pretty darn bad.
This is green summer conditions.
What?
Is it bad? I know where that is.
Oh.
All right, we can go to the next one before people analyze it too much. I'm trying not to embarrass anyone.
You have one quick question or one quick statement is it would be nice to see retro enforcement for those who do have lawns down to the lake, those who seek forgiveness rather than permission.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah. I fully agree. How can we get neighbors to change their perspective? So we're pretty much winding up our time together. And just so I don't blow past that comment online, I should address it a little bit more clearly. The statement was that we should have better enforcement action, essentially, for people who do transition their forested natural shorelines to lawn. When something like that does happen, our office will cite the landowner, say, hey, you have a land use violation. This has been an intensive vegetative removal. And we'll try to work with them to try to get better shoreline vegetation in. Quite often we would lean into trying to find some technical assistance from our partners because our staff are not specialists in shoreline plantings. Also recognizing that our lovely Soil and Water District folks are not regulatory. So they might know how to help people, but once people are in an enforcement case, they kind of, kick themselves out of the system to get a lot of technical assistance, if you will. Technical assistance is more for people who are playing by the rules. Our office, we work with land use attorneys to work with enforcement cases. So if a case was really serious, that is who we would work with. And when we talk about future things, this is something that our ordinance doesn't have really great language for how we expect to be seeing these violations get rectified. I have some ideas of things I want to be doing to fix that. And in the future, when we get to the last slide, I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we get to that last point I'll have. So the last thing I'm asking for you guys to participate in here is, how do you think you could get your neighbors to change their perspective? If you've got, even let's pick a neighbor who they're busy, they've got kids, they just want to get their kids down to the lake and recreate. They don't want to have bugs, so they don't want to have tall grass. They're afraid of ticks. Rightfully so. There's some weird tick diseases coming out. But how do we help those people? How do we empathize with them and get on the same page with them? Any ideas for how if we could wave a magic wand and fix the future of Cook County lakes so that we're all on a good path for better water quality? Is there some things that we glean today to try to be protective and proactive for the blue-green algae and the other kind of emerging topics for our lake shores?
Elena did a thing, I don't know how many years ago, where all the participants that showed up got a GIS map of their land. How long ago was that? 3, 5?
2019.
So,
No, or 2020 is right before COVID. It's
so you got a large scale map of your property and you got several sheets of tracing paper. And the exercise was to go through and put the tracing paper down and draw out one scenario, draw out another and what have you. I think if lake associations as a group did that together, maybe not the entire lake, but maybe one bay of the lake or something where all the neighbors get together, you get a hold of the county, you get these maps made, and you can help each other kind of determine how property should or could look. Because that was a meaningful exercise that we did, and it was well attended, and it was really enthusiastically, besides the fact you got the great big map, but it was a good thing. And we had a couple of experts or something, didn't we, that kind of helped you plan some of that?
Yeah, we had, I think, around 60 people attend, and we had it in the evening so that working people could attend. And we had it as a conservation kind of, spring into conservation is what we called it. And so that spring into conservation, we brought in a lot of professionals also to speak and talk about what you could do with your land. And it was very interactive, and yeah, people just sat and talked at their tables and designed exactly what you said, what could happen following presentations. And then they were able to go around and talk to the experts. And our goal was to do the next spring into conservation. We had some fun name, but then COVID hit, and then we were all at home, so we didn't get to, and it hasn't picked up since then.
And in that case, it was random people from all over the county.
It was everybody, yeah.
But if you did it more, but out of that random group, a lot of people came together. A group from Devil's Track or something, they tended to travel in a little herd. But I think if you did it as a lake association thing, I think it could be
Good planning.
an easy way to ease a neighbor who might, be having a little issue.
Yeah,
See that it's for the better good.
it's a great idea, getting everybody with some buy-in. So
Yeah.
telling you firsthand, just setting a rule and forcing that on a whole county is not a really great way to effectuate change. We just don't have the resources, plus that's not a great way to have relationships with people. But people are gonna be more invested if they've got some buy-in, if you've gotten them on the same page first.
Yeah, I mean, the Lake Steward program that is being started by the Cook County Coalition of Lake Associations is we started this year on Double Track, and we're just handing out our Lake Steward signs as we speak.
Oh, okay, I was unaware of that program.
Yeah,
It's,
Minnesota Lakes and Rivers sponsored it, or that's what
Yeah.
I'm working with.
and
Awesome.
their experience is that, the word gets out through an like our lake association, that it's a possibility, and then they apply, and then like Betsy's an inspector and I'm an inspector, and Wolfgang, who I still think it was his property. Inspectors, and we go and evaluate the property, and it's a big long list of things. Check, check, check. No check, no check. Oh, no, bad check.
Yeah.
And then they see whereas they can improve, what they can do, and then if they pass, woo, they get a sign.
Cool.
It's a very nice sign that you put on your dock, and then people drive by in their boats and they say, "What the hell's that sign?"
Nice.
And I guess it grows like topsy. That's their experience.
Okay,
Cute guy.
cool.
So we're doing that. We're hoping for the best,
Very good.
but we've already got 20 people who are gonna get signs.
Nice.
Cool. It's a good start. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a strong start.
We're amazed. We have good people.
Fantastic.
Elena's put on some really good shoreline restoration stuff too.
Mhm.
through soil and water. Some of those you learn quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, even the workshop that Max did on our lake, that's fantastic, and people's volunteers putting in plants and.
Was that this year?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good job.
we like Max.
All right, let's go on. I'll wrap this up. Do something to percolate on a little bit more, but we'll go to my last slide here. So just kind of in the course of my career doing land use regulation on people's private property, which doesn't make you very popular, I will say there's a few takeaways I just wanted to share with you guys. And this isn't rocket science, but I think there's important things to keep in mind to avoid judging people, if you will. If you look at them on an aerial photo, it's like, bad people. Well, just first, before we reserve judgment, first and foremost, land and private property is deeply personal. People have a connection with their property. They have a sense of ownership. I would also indicate that we are all here for only a period of time, however long we're here. And so there's going to be someone else on that property in the future, whether they're your kids or your grandkids or the person you're going to sell it to, or the Nature Conservancy if you give it to the Nature Conservancy. You know, there's all kinds of options, but someone else is someday going to have your property. They're going to inherit how you treat the land. So you can ask yourself, how are you going to be leaving this land? Are you leaving it better than you found it? But also just remember, like, it's a very sensitive topic. So when you're approaching anyone about their property, you have to kind of keep in mind, like, it's almost like their kid in some sense, especially if it has that deep sentimental value. There's some properties that have lawn right down to the lake, and that lawn has been there for 50 years. It is grandfathered in. They have a right to have it. It might not be ideal for stewardship, but they have it, it's their right, that's all there is to it. So just kind of keep those things in mind before you judge too much. It is both water recreation and land uses, so let's keep in mind that lakeshore owners aren't the only people effectuating the water quality. I think sometimes they get pointed at as holding the bag, but there are also a lot of people coming onto the lakes with their boats and their different recreational equipment. So they're also a very important piece of this puzzle. Conservation is more efficient than restoration. So, keeping what we have, there's some great sayings and statistics about just how efficient it is financially, energy-wise, to keep what is good than to have to let things get bad and then have to pay money to fix it. So just letting a shoreline grow up and not mowing is a pretty darn cheap way to help improve things than having to do very intensive planting. And prevention is more efficient than regulation. So although we can set whatever all the rules are that people could imagine, at the end of the day, trying to prevent the problems is a lot better. Getting people's buy-in, right, than trying to fight the system. Always going to be better to get that buy-in from folks. And then participation in the local processes matter. This is kind of like the last point I wanted to key in, like what Devil's Track Lake sounds like you guys are doing is you're getting people's civic participation. I work with people on comment letters for variances and conditional use permits, getting that type of participation. All these ways, whether you want to join a planning commission someday or join some parks and recreation board at the county, getting involved in local government or have your lake associations. If you're a lake that doesn't have a lake association, there's just a lot of ways for you to actually exert your energy to try to actually have a touch point with these issues. And I think that's a really cool part of Cook County is that this is a pretty tight-knit community that everyone can play a role if they want to. So I think this has been a really great opportunity to talk with you guys about rules. So thanks. I'm gonna go now. Layton, you wanna wrap this up?
Wrap it up.
What I take now is we like Max. That's what I took away from that one. We like Max.
I'm going to sign off, but I want to thank you very much. It's been a very informative session and one that I feel good about being able to share key points with our association members in our annual meeting at the end of the month. So thank you.
Thanks, Rory. Thank you all for your time and for coming both virtually and in person. We will try to have this uploaded to the YouTube channel so that you can share it. We'll try to put a link on our website and I can let you know when that happens. I've had a few requests for slides to be printed and put in PDFs, so we'll get that up and available and accessible to everybody Thank you, Neva and Chris, for your time and for all your effort and for sharing your expertise, because that's wonderful. You don't need to listen to me talk anymore. And so thank you again, and thank you for all you're doing for our lakes, because I know a lot of you are working really hard to keep them clean, and it's a group effort. It's not up to one or two people. So
Thank you.
yeah, everybody. Thank you, everybody on Zoom.
Is that algae transportable from lake to lake, or does it have to develop in a lake?
No,
You can transport it?
Yeah. One of the questions was always, how does algae get from lake to lake? And one of